All right, everybody. So if you can hear me, I'm just getting stuff set up, and we'll be rolling here in just a minute. Alrighty, well, I was going to try and get a monitor up here so I could watch what was going on and make sure everything was going on, but you can give me a quick note in the chat here. Let me know if you are seeing the seeing the stream okay. And other than that, I'll just wait until I see some positive answers on the thread, and then I'll just start rolling here. One thing to keep in mind is that there's about a 10 to 15 second delay between what I'm recording on screen and what you guys actually see. So there's going to be a little bit of a delay if you chat for putting up. If you put up a question or something like that, it'll take me a few seconds to get to it. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of move along a bit, and I will kind of pause at intervals with what I'm saying, and I'll just kind of look over at the chat and see if there's anything new popping up here. So. Welcome to this kind of first live session here. We'll be doing other ones of these just as general ones, as well as obviously ones for the class that some of you guys are here for, and for those ones, though, we'll be using a Google Hangout, so there's a little less difficulty with lag. So basically, you won't have to worry about as long a delay. You'll just be able to see kind of as we're sharing screen. Now, we may explore some other things like GoToMeeting or something like that if this gives us a lot of trouble. But for the most part, I think this should be fine. And the other nice thing is that this auto records, so it will be up on YouTube later, so that you can actually review this later if you want to. All right, so I'm just going to get started here, and I'm just going to do a couple of kind of generalized things, and we're going to move through some of just the basics of Modo and some of the some of the kind of the stuff that we would cover in an introductory class. Not so much going to go right into all of the details of everything right away, but this is probably going to be somewhere along the lines of about 45 minutes, just kind of a little walkthrough, as well as looking at some kind of finished stuff, and then we'll go from there. And I'm going to also go through a few just kind of general workflow things. I'm not going to step through things really kind of one step at a time, as we would either in a recorded tutorial or in a live chat where I'm actually going to be covering specific things, and we'll go through step by step and take real specific questions as we go. But this is just going to be just kind of an overview kind of thing. So if something really kind of throws you off, don't worry about it too much. We'll be able to cover things in more depth in other sessions. So here we go. So for those of you who have never looked at Modo or have looked at Modo very little, here's Modo, yay! So if you had looked at Modo previous to version 901, which is the current version, and that's what I'm on right now, it will look a little bit different, mostly the same, but the large difference is going to be you used to have a tabbed menu up here at the top that's been kind of swapped out, although it's a lot of the same stuff, but it gives you the basic general kind of layouts of Modo and the different ways that the menus are going to be organized. So I'm going to walk through that here briefly as we get started, and then kind of how you could customize this kind of thing. So at the top here in this section, like I said, if you're in previous versions 801 and before, you'll see just some tabs up here. And what these do is these give you access to different tools and different things that you would need, to work on specific aspects of a 3D pipeline. So the first one that kind of pops up by default is the Model tab. And what the Model tab gives you is a large viewport in the center that gives you a 3D view of everything in your scene. It gives you menus for creation tools on the left. And on the right, it gives you all sorts of other information, statistics and properties on the stuff that you're creating and whatever you currently have selected, and that's going to be over here on the right, as well as some other things which we'll dig into these more here a bit later on, but there's more info over here. And then along the top, there are kind of commonly used tools and presets and stuff like that that take you through the different sections of Modo. And so that's what's there. And a lot of this stuff isn't going to change, but it's just going to be kind of swapped out for more appropriate pieces depending on what part of the workflow you're in. So this is the model view, and if you'll notice here at the top right corner, there is this little, there are a series of little widgets up here that give you general navigation, so you can see you can move around with the first one, you can rotate your view with the second one, and you can zoom in and out with the third one. So that's kind of your general navigation functions there. And then you'll also have this yellow double arrow, which I'll skip over for the moment and come back to. And then you have a little kind of a cog or a gear, which is going to give you settings for the viewport. And then you have some other options for kind of splitting up this view, which is a little bit more advanced, but we'll definitely talk about it later on. So the one that I skipped over here is this double arrow one, and I use this very frequently. And it's what takes this view and makes it kind of a full screen like view. And what it does if you click on it in this modeling viewport is it actually pulls it down to where that 3D view is just the top right corner, and then in the other quarters of the screen you get what are called orthographic views. So these are essentially two-dimensional views that allow you to get greater precision and alignment of any of your objects, any of the things that you're modeling or working on kind of in 3D space. So if, for example, we just pop a sphere into here, which I just hold down the Shift key, and you can click on any one of these little primitive items here, and it will just drop one into the scene. So you can see here in our 3D view, we have our sphere, and we can look all around at it, at any different angle. But then we see it from the top view, from the front view, and from the right view here. And so these views are going to always be tied together, these two-dimensional views. So if I move up or down in the top view, you can see that the right view is actually moving left and right because we're kind of sliding it along. If I move left and right, you'll see that that front view slides along with it. Because all of these views are kind of tied together. That way you don't lose focus on one part. If I zoom in on one part of this sphere, it's going to zoom in on that same part here. So that let's go ahead and just select some edges here. You can see these edges are selected and they're at the center of my view in all of my viewports. And so these are tied together just to kind of facilitate you keeping everything lined up. Now with the 3D view, you have more flexibility because you can actually move this one around completely freely without being stuck and tied in. All right, so it's kind of general navigation stuff. We'll get in more depth on that stuff later, but I just want to kind of quickly give that. So there we are back in the big, large 3D perspective view. So the next tab over, and this is one that we'll look at here actually a little bit today with what we're going to look at. This is the topology view. And what topology is it's essentially the flow of the polygons on a 3D surface. So, you know, we have a sphere, and if I look at this over here, and if I turn off my wireframes really quickly so you can see, okay, there's a sphere, right? And what we end up seeing and what we end up rendering and what we're looking at on screen is a sphere. It's a ball, right? But there are a lot of different ways that you could describe a ball. So if we look at this with topology in mind, it's a series of these polygons that all lay together and stick together to make a sphere, right? So depending on how you're doing your modeling, topology can be really important because if you're animating something like a character, for example, you don't want to just have really haphazard layout of all your polygons because it's going to be very difficult to animate the character if the polygons don't flow the right way. Or if you're working on sculpting, which we'll look at a bit later on, you don't want to have really complex odd-shaped polygons because that will make it difficult for rendering, for applying textures, and things like that. So you may want to add some better topology or a better flow of polygons in order to better describe your model and to make it something that's easier to work with. So that's topology, and we'll definitely have some more looks at that later on, including today as we get going here a little bit. So the next one here is the UV edit view, and this is a part of the 3D workflow that a lot of times gets skipped over by beginners. I know when I was first learning 3D a long time ago, this is something that I skipped learning for a long time. And basically what a UV is it's a two-dimensional representation of your 3D objects. So if we look here, we've got our sphere in our 3D space, and then we've got a bottom view of it actually looking up. You can see that we have all of these polygons, and all of them, as I select them here, you can see these polygons here that are selected in the 3D view are represented here in this 2D space. So you can think of this kind of like if you were to make, I don't know, if you were to make a bearskin rug of your 3D geometry and to lay it out totally flat, like you would, lay out a bearskin rug on the floor, this is what's going on here. So it's taking everything and it's putting it into two-dimensional space. And the reason that you would need to do that is because if you're going to apply an image or a texture to the surface of this object, you need to know how that texture, how that image is going to exist on the surface of this three-dimensional object, since an image is always going to be two-dimensional, right? So if I wanted, for example, to take these polygons, let's get like a little group of polygons. If I wanted to take these polygons right here, and I wanted to have an image like a movie screen that's going to project onto these polygons, excuse me, I would have to know how to put them on an image in order to line them up. Now on this default UV, and this is the one that's just built onto this sphere, you can see that it's actually it's kind of odd shaped. So these 4 polygons, if I look at them, are a different aspect ratio. They're taller and skinnier than they are on the 3D model, and that's okay. Sometimes that's going to make little to no difference with how we're working, and sometimes we'll want to smooth those out and get them more closely representing the way that they appear in 3D space so that we can put images and textures on our objects without them stretching and distorting and things like that. So a lot of times if you see 3D that has issues with the textures where they look like they're stretching or they just look like they're kind of smeared across the surface, usually that's going to be an issue with the UV maps. So just something to keep in mind there. All right, so So that's a UV map. And a lot of objects, if you create a simple sphere or a cube or any one of these kind of basic objects that we see here, cube, sphere, cylinder, cone, torus, which is like a donut, any one of these, they're going to come with a UV kind of out of the box. Now, if you start editing or creating different things, it's going to adjust this UV and try to make it match. But a lot of times it's going to be something that you would want to go and recreate UV maps. And so we'll look at recreating UV maps to get the best possible UV map as we get going in future sessions. But it's one of those processes that it takes a little bit of getting used to at first, but Modo has a very good UV tool workflow. So once you get used to doing it, it's not very hard, and then it's a very powerful tool for just getting more out of what you're doing in 3D. All right, so moving on, let's look at the next tab, which is the Paint tab. And it's a little bit of a misnomer because you don't just paint in this tab. This tab has all sorts of tools for painting, which is going to be, putting textures, images, and paintbrush strokes directly on your 3D objects. But at the same time, it also has tools for sculpting. So sculpting allows you to deform and change the mesh of this object, the surface of this object, as if it were clay. So if you're familiar with applications like ZBrush, this is something along those lines. Now, the sculpting that's in ZBrush is going to be more powerful than the sculpting that's in Modo, but there are many things that you can do with sculpting in Modo that are that will typically suit a lot of your needs, and then there will be kind of a break point where if you're getting into some really detailed, very complex sculpts and some of the tools you need aren't here in Modo, that might be a spot where you would hop over and you would work part of your model in ZBrush and do a lot of your detailing in ZBrush, and then you could step back into Modo for other things like rendering or animation or things like that. And there is a tool actually that allows you to go back and forth between Modo and ZBrush that makes it much easier than you would think. It just kind of basically hands the model back and forth between the two applications. All right, so that's what you've got in here. So sculpting, just so you can kind of see a real quick idea here, has kind of two different functions. There's sculpting that happens just on the surface of a model. So it's basically taking and moving the polygons around. So you can see I'm just using the sculpt tool here to deform the surface here, but I can't really get a lot of detail. This is basically just like giving me a slightly more organic way to shape my models. So even if I get a really small paintbrush here, see, it doesn't really do much as far as detail goes. So that's kind of the first level of sculpting, and it can be really useful if you just want to get some more organic adjustment of your model, the shape of the polygons. There is, however, a deeper layer, and this is going to be more along the lines of kind of the ZBrush kind of thing, where you can sculpt on something that's smaller than the polygons themselves. And I'm going to turn that on here so that you can see. Let's go ahead and turn it on. And I'm going to increase the level here a bit. And now if I take this same smaller brush and I paint across the surface, you can see, and it's a little bit subtle here. Let me turn on a different shader so you can see this a little bit better. So you can see that we are getting the surface deforming. So right now it's pretty rough because I'm dealing with a fairly low level here. So you can see, though, I've kind of sculpted this up. You can see the individual triangles, so you can see it's not very high resolution, but it can be good for making larger changes. So if I go with a bigger brush here, so you can see something like this, it works pretty well. But once I zoom in and try to get finer detail, it kind of breaks down. But you can step up and down on your levels of detail. So what I'm going to do is, let's click up. So as I go to level 4, you can see this is level 4 now, this smooths out quite a bit. Let's go up another level here. So now you can see that's actually getting fairly smooth. So now I could go back in here with a brush and I could make more fine detailed adjustments to this without having to lose that resolution. Now, one of the cool things about this is that as you work on these multiple resolutions, right now my model is starting to get a little bit on the heavy side as far as the number of polygons, so it can be a little bit more taxing on a computer. But what you can do at any given time is just to step back to a lower subdivision level. So now I clicked back to level 2. You can see that this gets pretty rough looking. But if I'm just animating this, say this is a little spaceship and I'm going to fly it around the screen, while I'm working on the animation, I really don't need to see every little bit of detail here. I don't need to see all of this. So if I go down to level 2, or I could go even to level 1, now this is going to behave very well even on pretty low-end computers, and I can do all of my animation, and then when I go to render, it's just going to render at this higher detail level. So this becomes a very powerful way to work because you can have the detail when you need it, you can have it off when you don't need it, and you can kind of optimize the way you're working here. So so that's kind of the basics of what goes on here in Sculpt. And then there's also painting, as I'd mentioned. And I don't have painting set up on here at the moment, so I'm not really going to show it, but it works a lot in the same way. So we have these different brushes, and they work just like the sculpt brushes, except now you're actually painting a texture onto the surface. So actually I can start this off without doing much here. All I have to do is go ahead and add in a texture, and I'm just going to put this on my desktop. I'm not going to give it any particular name or mess with the resolution because we'll go into that in more detail later. But now if I go in here and I get a brush, and oops, helps if I get an actual paintbrush. If I get a brush here and I go and make a paint stroke, you can see now I've got this painting capability. Now this isn't going to be limited the same way that your sculpting is limited. Basically what's going to go on here is this is going to be limited by the resolution of the image that you created. So I created an image that was 2048 pixels square, and it covers the whole surface of the object. That's okay for kind of basic painting and things. If I wanted to get really detailed, so if I zoomed way in here, I wanted to get a small brush and paint, you can see just like the way that the polygons started to look kind of chunky, we get the same kind of thing going on here where we actually start to see individual pixels, right? And that's because there's just not enough resolution to get that fine of detail. Now if I'm zoomed out here, it looks totally fine and it's not a big deal. But it depends on the level that you want, and you can create textures of much higher resolution if you need to, and that's pretty easy to do. So let's see here. I'm going to just change something real quick here. There we go. So yeah, so as I get a little bit bigger, you don't really see any issues with the resolution. The smaller I get, the more issues that we see, and then we would need a higher resolution image to work with. So what's cool also about this is that since you're now painting essentially directly on the surface of this 3D object, you can actually do some really kind of cool things. So if I were to, for example, turn on a noise brush, this is going to be kind of like a Photoshop brush that has some variation to the texture. Let me go ahead and make this I'm going to go to black instead of white here. So you can see here as I paint this, now it's not a smooth circular stroke, but I'm getting a little bit more noise added in here, right? So I could go in really quickly here and add in some dirt or wear or something like that to a model, to its texture really easily. And now I could do this and layer it on top of an image, or if I wanted I could bring in an image and then just paint directly on the top of the image as well. So yeah, so there's a lot you can do with that, and we will definitely be covering some of this stuff here a bit later on as well. All right, so moving on, there is the Layout tab, and this is something that you use very frequently when you're kind of getting a scene together. And this works well because it allows you access to a bunch of presets. So Modo ships with a whole bunch of kind of preset items. So here you can see this is one little corner of my preset content here. This is just models that are plants. All right, so if I back out here, let's just do it this way. You can see this is my organic section, and it has leaves, miscellaneous, plants, rocks, trees. If I back out even more, this is all of the different models that come with it. So I've got animals, I've got basic stuff, which we'll look at later on, creatures, electronic devices, you name it. There's a whole bunch of different things here. So I'm going to pop in here real quick to one of these. Oh, here, actually, I can show you this. So this is from a video series that I did a while back about creating essentially a Lego model, one individual block at a time. So all of these pieces are what you would need to be able to create an entire little small Lego helicopter. So you can see here, this piece would be the piece that rotates and makes the top helicopter blade. This would be one of the little side stabilizer propellers. This here is going to be the canopy where the pilot would sit. These would be kind of like the landing gear on the bottom. So all these pieces you can put together and create a Lego helicopter. And once you get going on the basics of Modo and you want a real challenge on modeling, by the way, I would recommend going through that series. It's about 15 hours of just modeling this kind of stuff. And if you go through and model every one of these things, there will be very few things that you can't figure out a way to model. It's pretty in depth, and yeah. So, but we won't go into these here. But this is just another example. Now these are saved off after they were created as presets. So at any point, I could just take and drop these into the scene. They're really small though, so they're actually the size of Legos. So whereas this is going to be a bigger piece, so I'm not going to drop it in here right now because it's a pretty awkward size difference. But you can see there are other things in here as well. So let's go over to human here, because this is a good place, has a lot of interesting things. So there are things kind of like a starter point for doing some sculpting. So you can see there's they've got male and female versions that you could take and put in a bust and then sculpt on top of it. So it gives you something to start from. There are other kind of higher quality models in here. There's some eyeballs you could put in, an ear, which if you want to have a nice high quality ear, there you go. And then there are other pieces here that I use pretty frequently, depending on what it is I'm working on. These can really kind of give you a good quick jump into what it is you're creating. So I'm going to actually take and drop in this man head, and we'll give that a second here. Oh, there we go. So here he is. And what this is basically a 3D model of a character's head. Right, so fairly simple, but we'll actually take and do some other things with this here in a little bit. So yeah, this gives you an idea of what you could do. Just double click and these drop into your content, and so that's what you do here in the layout tab. So moving on, the next two tabs work together really heavily. The first one is the setup tab, which is basically where you set up and organize your animation, and then the other one here is the animate tab, and this is going to be where you actually animate. So the difference here being that setup is going to control rigging, which if you haven't done much in 3D, rigging is kind of creating the underpinnings and the workings that will make things move beyond just moving something from position to position. So if I was going to take a ball and have it roll across the screen, that doesn't require any rigging. But if I wanted to, say, make a character or even something simpler, something that's just going to move, but the actual object itself is going to deform, then that would all happen here in the Setup tab. But it also can deal with more mechanical things, like if I wanted to take, a couple of pieces of some mechanical object or objects that are multiple pieces, and I want to hook them up so that they work together. Say I wanted to have a series of gears and then a handle that if I turn the handle, it's going to turn all of the gears. I would set up all of those relationships with how those gears will move here in the Setup tab. And this is also where we would work with dynamics, which is going to be simulation of physics. So if you wanted to take a good example would be like if I wanted to take a ball and I wanted it to bounce down some stairs, instead of having to do that manually, I could take a ball, I could give it some physical attributes, I could take a model of some stairs, and I could also give those physical attributes, and then you just set it up and you let it calculate, and then the ball, if it's set up right, will bounce down the stairs, and then it's going to have all of the right real-world interactions as it would if you physically did that. Now, the one downside is you don't get a lot of freedom for doing exaggerated motion with that kind of animation, but it does allow you to get fairly realistic and complex animation done very quickly. I'll use that for things like if I wanted to set up some debris in a scene, and I've got a bunch of bricks or something like that, and I want to just create a pile of bricks in the corner, and I can model the bricks, create a bunch of them, and then I can just use physics to pile them up in the corner of the screen, and then I've got a nice setup of realistically layered and fallen on top of each other bricks. Now, I can use that as a still thing where they're not going to move, or I could also actually just actually just put them in place with that and then leave them alone. So that's what's going to go on in there. And then the animate tab, as I had mentioned, this is where you actually set up and tweak and adjust and fine tune all of the motion in a scene. There are going to be graphs that cover how the motion works. So if something is going to move across the screen, you'll see at time frame 0 it's in one place, and then you'll see a curve that puts it in the other place. So here, if for example, let's go back and bring our sphere back on here really quickly. So if I wanted to take this and let's say we're just going to animate the X position here. So I'm going to start with it over here, and that's at time frame 0, and then we'll go down to maybe 60, and I'll move it over here. Now you can see that I have an animation curve. So as I move across here, you see, there you go, some animation. Oops, and I see a question just popped up here. Let's see, it says, one question in people's mind, know how Modo compares with Maya, considering workflow between and the friendliness. Okay, so actually this makes a good pause point here, because I've gotten through most of the stuff that we're looking at, minus the render tab, which is the last one we'll look at here. But okay, so comparing Modo to an application like Maya. So for a lot of purposes, Modo, Maya, 3D Studio Max, Cinema 4D, a lot of them are going to behave very similarly as kind of an overarching kind of technical standpoint, theoretical standpoint. You're still going to be dealing in all of them with polygons or subdivision surfaces. Sometimes people are dealing with curved surfaces, which are going to be NURBS or other surfaces that are described by curves instead of polygons. You're always going to be dealing with those kind of things. You're always going to be dealing with manipulating and moving things around on screen, moving, rotating, and scaling objects. You will almost always also be dealing with some type of keyframes, or there are modifications on that, but for the most part, it's going to be a lot of this kind of thing where you have at point A an object's here, at point B an object is here, and then you'll be controlling how it gets from point A to point B. That kind of stuff is almost identical between Maya and Modo. Where you're going to see big differences then in any of these applications, Maya, Modo, Cinema 4D, 3D Studio Max, is going to be implementation and then kind of specified tool set. So with an application like Maya, it really excels at stuff like character animation and some other things. So it's going to have a very refined animation tool set that lets you do a lot of things with a lot of complexity. Now, a lot of those same tools are in Modo and in most other 3D applications. They're going to be laid out a little bit differently, but they're all going to be there. Where Modo really excels, in my opinion, is it has a very good modeling system. So you can model very, very well inside of Modo. It has a lot of great tools for creating models that look good. It also has a very good texturing workflow. And along with that is the UVs, which I mentioned a little while back, and then also rendering. So Maya has its own internal renderer, and then it also often, because it ships with it, uses Mental Ray as the rendering engine. Now, the rendering engine built into Modo would be more like the higher end Mental Ray render that's in Maya. I personally like the rendering engine much better. I think it's one of the best rendering engines on the market. It's very fast, it's very adaptable and adjustable. It has a high degree of things that you can fine tune in your renders. But at the same time, right out of the box, I think it has some of the best looking renderers just without having to do any adjustments. We'll get into how to use it best right at its out of the box settings, and then also how to improve on it and make stuff look even better. But that's going to be where Modo, I think, really excels, is going to be in that modeling, texturing, and rendering workflow. It's fantastic for that. The other question here is, does it have motion graphic stuff like Cinema 4D? There is no direct plug-in for the motion graphic stuff, and that's actually why Cinema 4D is used really, really heavily in broadcast, is that it has a very strong motion graphics component. Now, that being said, you can do some really awesome motion graphics inside of Modo. And since we're looking at Modo here, I will definitely be showing stuff that you can do with motion graphics in Modo that are really awesome. But there's no like direct plugin like the MoGraph plugin for Cinema 4D. And let's see, there's another question popped up here. So doing pre-recorded animation. So I'm assuming this talking about like motion capture kind of animation. You can bring motion capture data straight into Modo. And especially there's some extra rigging tools that are available that lets you automatically set up characters, and then you can apply motion capture animation directly to them. You can also work really well with some of the free character design tools out there, and we'll look at some of the back and forth later, both in live sessions, and I'm also going to be doing some recordings for doing workflow with, and now I'm completely blanking on the name, but there's a character tool, a 3D character design tool that was just purchased by Adobe. And it lets you basically build a character based off of parameters. So, you go to the character's face and you adjust the skin color, you adjust the eyebrow height, you adjust how far the eyebrows are apart, how thick the eyebrows are, the eyes, what color the eyes are, how big the eyes are, all that kind of stuff. So you go in and adjust these parameters and you create a character. And the cool thing about that is you create a character that then can also have a basic rig attached to it. And then right through their own website, you can, and it's Mixamo, the name just came to me as I'm talking here, Mixamo. You can go right to their website, and there's a lot of motion capture data right there. Some of it you can get for free, some of it you can buy, just on an individual animation basis. And you can apply that to the character, and then it comes straight into Modo. And there are some tweaks and some adjustments you can make inside of Modo to make that stuff even better. There's actually a workflow that I'm trying to get really ironed down and kind of perfected, which I'll be doing some future videos on because it's also a part of a larger animation project that I'm working on right now. So I'm kind of working on that overall workflow, and we'll be talking more about that later on. But yes, kind of short answer, yes, you can bring motion capture data right into Modo as long as you have your characters kind of set up to receive it. One thing you can also do is you can bring in motion capture animation just based off of the actual bones. So this is going to be, bones are essentially what you refer to as kind of the non-rendering underpinnings of a character, for example. And if you bring in those bones and you have them set up and they have the motion capture attached to them, which you can do a number of different ways, you can then take and you can tie in the motion to a character that you have created inside of Modo. So say, for example, I have a really complex character. It's got fingers and toes and everything all rigged out, and so the motion capture has all of that data on it. Well, I could bring that into a character that, maybe I just have a very basic model. I don't have fingers, I don't have toes, I just have, feet, legs, I've got a torso rig, and then I've got just basic arms, and the hands are one piece, so I don't get any control over fingers or anything like that. Well, I can take that motion capture data and align it so that basically tie in what you do have to what's on the motion capture data, and then your character is going to move along with the motion capture. It's a pretty cool setup that it takes a little bit of work kind of to get it moving. We'll probably talk about this. We'll either talk about it towards the end, although that might be a little bit more of an advanced topic that we may not cover in this session, but we should lay all the groundwork so that when I do some future lessons on that, you'll be able to pick up and move on from there. But again, yes, short answer, yes, you can work with pre-recorded stuff right inside of Modo. If you work with an application like Motion Builder already, you can take and adjust and do a lot of fine tuning on it if you're comfortable in Motion Builder, and the same animation can come out and can get piped into Modo. A lot of times, what they used to call it was a Modo sandwich. Is a lot of studios would do a workflow where they would do their modeling inside of Modo, and they do their animation, their character animation, in a separate application like Motion Builder or Maya, using either motion capture or using hand-done animation that they've done inside of Maya or something like that, and then bring it back into Modo so that the animated character gets textured and lit and rendered inside of Modo to take advantage of its really good texture, lighting, and rendering tools. So yeah, there's a lot of options for working with Modo back and forth with other applications as well. I've done a lot of workflow between Maya and Modo. I've also done a lot of work between Lightwave and Modo, kind of back a few years, but I had done that. And I'm also going to be looking at some stuff between Cinema 4D and Modo, but it's not as much in with the work that I've been doing lately, so I haven't gotten to that yet. But it does work pretty well with most other 3D applications. So hopefully that answers all the questions that were up until now. So with that, let's continue on here, and I'm actually going to hide my sphere again here, and we'll hop over into the last tab that we're going to talk about here, which is the render tab. So Modo features essentially two different kinds of rendering, and one of them is this preview render here, which we'll look at, and then the other one is basically an offline render. You click render and then you wait for it to render and you see it. And actually, sorry, here I got one more question popped up. Let's see. Modifiers and simulations. How well can it work with things like liquid, foam, fire, and particles? So quick answer, it does have a particle system. It does allow you to do some kind of basic fluid simulations and things. Aside from that, it has a really good importer from RealFlow. And you can also, if you want to work with some of the more complex fluids and things that are done in Maya, you can actually work with Alembic, which is a file format, Alembic caches, and bring them back into Modo. So it does have stuff to do a lot of that stuff built in, but once you get to kind of a higher level, real similar to like with the sculpting, you can do a certain amount right inside of Modo, and then once you get to a little bit higher level, you'd want to switch over to another application to handle that, and then you can either render there or you could bring it back in. But yeah, so there is some stuff built in, and then there's the ability to import export with applications like RealFlow. I think would be the big one. You can work on your particle and your fluid simulations in RealFlow. You can either save out just the particles, or you can save out the meshed geometry. So it's basically taking all the fluid simulation, liquid simulation, and turning it into essentially a 3D surface, and then you bring that in and render inside of Modo. So I've seen both of those work pretty well, and I'm going to be having some stuff on that as well here. I've got RealFlow up and ready to go here, and I'm just working on some nice pipeline stuff to come from RealFlow into Modo. So yeah, that kind of stuff is in there, and we'll be talking a bit about that as well. Okay, so back to the render tab. So with the preview render here, now the nice thing about this is I hit play, and you can see here's my character, and if I select him and I focus in on him, you can see that I can move around here, and it starts off as kind of a pixely lower res version, and depending on how complex your scene is, that's going to be more pixely and lower resolution. But with a relatively simple scene like this, it's pretty decent. And then as soon as I release the mouse, it's going to start to refine it, and it will get better and better quality. I can go here and make adjustments to this. So let's say I want to create a better shader for this, and maybe I want to adjust the color. Let's make him gray, and you can see everything adapts here in real time. So, if I wanted to make him orange, let's go ahead and make him orange. You can see that he changes, and we get a good, fairly quick render time to see what this is going to look like. Now, there are some drawbacks to rendering this way. There are some ways you can adjust this rendering engine, this preview render, in order to make it kind of what you would get for a finished render, which we'll definitely talk about later on. I see a big amount of workflow shifted towards using this rendering engine as opposed to just rendering, which is going to be like this. If I just click render, you'll see it's going to take it, and it's got to boot it up, and then it's going to render out, and it's going to create the finished image. So you can see there's our image. It's going to look, for the most part, almost identical. The upside of rendering in this preview render is that you can set it up so that it essentially will continuously refine and get better and better and better. That's not going to matter on a lot of simple scenes, but in more complex scenes, it really does make a big difference, because there are going to be some things that on this regular render are not going to look very good, because you have to go in and really tweak and fine-tune the settings to smooth things out. A lot of times it's going to be things like motion blur, blurry reflections, depth of field. So if a camera has things out of focus, those kind of things can be rendered here, and they can end up really noisy and really kind of grainy and pixelated looking until you clean them up. But with something like the preview render, you can just allow them to refine. So here, if for example, let me move in here on the face, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the camera here, and I'm actually going to turn on my depth of field, and you can see now he's all out of focus. So I'm going to focus on him, and I'm going to turn my f-stop way down. So now you can see, if we look here, let's kind of zoom in. I'm going to focus the camera on his ear. All right, so you can see the ear is in focus, but like the nose and the eyes are all out of focus here. I can also change it here. Let's change it again. So now we're focused on his nose, and I've got a really shallow depth of field here. So his ears are pretty out of focus, even though they're, you know, right there pretty close. So you can see that this is just kind of continuing to refine. And actually one cool feature here is if I mouse over different areas, it will focus my my processing on that area. So you can kind of refine one area first. And that way if you're making changes to something like the eyes, I could mouse over the eyes and it's going to refine that. And then if I don't like it, I don't have to wait for everything else to render. I can just go make an adjustment and then again focus in on the eyes, and it works pretty well. Now if I just take this and render it, let's do the same kind of render. You can see it's going to come out, and if I look here, wait for it to finish. If I zoom in here, you can see that this is really, really noisy around the ears here, because this this kind of depth of field takes a while to refine. So if I go and I set these settings up to a higher quality, I can get this cleaned up. But if I'm just looking for kind of getting a preview here, I can leave this preview rendering for a minute or two, or sometimes less, sometimes 30 seconds or something, and I get a nice high quality looking render. So so the preview render versus the offline render, which I usually call the F9 render, because it's F9 is the hotkey, and a lot of people tend to just call it the F9 render. They both have their drawbacks, and they both have their strengths. So the strengths on this one here is, you know, you can let it refine and you can let things just kind of smooth out for as long as you want. You know, if I want to leave this going for half an hour, I'm just going to end up with a completely stellar looking image that's really clean, really smooth, and everything's going to look great. There are some differences though with the way they handle the cached lighting. So in some cases, you're going to get some kind of muddy, garbled looking, kind of fine areas of detail on the lighting that won't refine over time. You actually have to go and tweak and adjust the settings to get those to work well in preview. But those kind of things will tend to look a little bit better with the F9 render right off the bat. So depending on what you have in the scene, you'll want to use one or both of these. But definitely as you're doing things like working on texture and lighting, the preview engine is really good for that, because I can take this and I can see what's going to happen very quickly. And actually I'm going to turn my depth of field off because that's going to slow everything down. But, you know, so if I'm working on this guy and I say, okay, I think this works pretty well, but I'd like to see how it looks in an environment, right? So all I would have to do is come down to these presets that we were talking about before, and let me add in a preset environment. And now you can see the lighting is coming from this image, which is just like a sphere around the scene here. So I could even turn off my light that's shining on his forehead here, and now all of the lighting is just coming from this environment, and it also is affecting the reflections. So you can see here kind of the reflections here, and if I make the reflections more clear, we'll actually see the reflected environment in there. All right, and I could go with more complex reflections, like let's make those blurry, and then I'll add some nice clear reflections on top. So now you can see this looks kind of like he has a clear coat cover on him. But you can see that this this environment is lighting up what's going on here in my 3D scene, and I can get a good preview of that. Now I could also be moving around lights. I could be adjusting more fine-tuned things about the texture on him, and and I can see what's going to happen here in real time. And let's see, I see a question popped up here. Preview, is it like F prime in Lightwave? Yes, very much like F prime, or Lightwave in the newer iterations has kind of a built-in rendering engine that does some real-time stuff a lot like this. And I do believe they've even added some of this kind of functionality into Mental Ray, though it's not quite the same. And then also, if you're using, or if you're familiar with V-Ray, which is kind of a standalone renderer that plugs into 3ds Max and Cinema 4D and Maya, and actually there's a Modo plugin now. It also has a renderer like this. Yeah, so it's very much like that. And the other question, yeah, Modo actually was initially started by an offshoot group of people that left Lightwave. So a lot of its developers from some of the previous versions of Lightwave came over to start creating Modo. So yes, that is correct. There's a fair bit of kind of, if you had, I was a person that started off in Lightwave when I started working in more professional 3D applications, and then I moved into Modo, and a lot of things seemed very familiar, and it was because there were a lot of developers that had previously worked on Lightwave. So yes, that is true. Good question. Yeah, so that's basically it. That's the basic walkthrough of Modo. And I just wanted to pull up another scene here. We're kind of getting time here, so I've got to wrap this up in the next 10-15 minutes. So I'll take some questions here in a moment. But I just wanted to bring up another scene that I've got here already set up. So this leverages something in Modo that I think is really powerful, and it exists in some ways in other applications, but I really like the implementation here in Modo. This is a system called Replicators, which basically allows you to take a single model or a group of models and place them throughout a scene. So in this case, I've got one little clump of grass, and then I also have a one single tree, and then I'm using replicators across this little hilly surface that I just sculpted to create, this kind of little scene. And then if we hop over to our render here and we get into a rendered camera, you can see, we'll give it a second. Sometimes it takes a minute for the preview render to load up. There we go. Especially with a more complex scene. So you can see here I've got now this whole scene here. It's got one of those environment images in the background, kind of providing the light. There's a little bit of fog so that you get the feeling that that there's some physical depth to the scene, a little bit of haze. And let's see here, as I'm going to mouse over kind of the middle section so you can see here, stuff that's here up close is going to be slightly out of focus because I've got depth of field turned on the camera. And then as we get out towards the middle of the scene, stuff is going to be in focus. And then further off in the background, again, stuff will be out of focus. So because I've been mousing over this middle section, you can see that has started to work. And now that I've got that kind of a little bit refined, if I just move the mouse off to the side, it's going to work on the scene evenly now. So it's going to refine everything kind of at the same rate. Now we won't see the refinement happen as quickly on that middle section because it already has a lot of refinement applied to it. But now we can kind of catch this up and say, okay, I'd kind of like to see how this little dirt patch is working over here. So okay, there you go. So you can mouse over that area and you can fine-tune that and see how that's going to look. Say, okay, let that go for a little bit. And then you can kind of, at will, go in and just kind of mouse over areas to see how they are working as far as your render quality is going to go. And then when you're kind of pretty much satisfied, you can just leave the mouse off and it will sit here and it will refine. Depending on how you have it set up, it will refine pretty much forever. At some point you're going to get really diminishing returns where waiting another half an hour, it's not going to look any better than if you've already waited for half an hour. But if you want to take in, this is very good if you're either wanting quick previews or if you're working with a client and you want to be able to send them something. You can really easily say, okay, I'm just going to let this render for 5 minutes and then send them whatever image quality I'm at 5 minutes. And it should be enough of a preview to get feedback. Say you're not sure if they're going to like, the placement of the grass or the trees. And you say, okay, render this out, give it a couple of minutes to kind of refine a bit, and you say, okay, how do you like this? And they say, okay, we like it, but we don't like the fact that this tree here in the foreground is overlapping the tree in the middle. Great. So you go in and you adjust the position of that tree, and you can send them off another preview after a couple of minutes. So this works really well for that kind of thing. And so that kind of gives you a general overview of a lot of the stuff in here. Stuff that we haven't looked at that we will look at in much more depth would be actually creating models and building models either from scratch or based off of existing stuff. We'll look at creating UV maps. We'll look at doing some sculpting. We will look at a lot of creation of textures and materials and lighting and rendering. And basically the idea here is that we'll do everything in kind of a layered approach where we go to kind of a certain level of competency across the board: modeling, texture, materials, lighting, animation, rendering, and then we go back over and kind of layer on higher quality skills. Now, what I will also do here, and I think is an important thing, is even from the get-go, we're going to look at getting renders that look pretty good. This is not far away, this image here you see going, from just the basic out-of-the-box settings in Modo. So what we'll be looking at is how to get a good quality looking render. Because I find that it's a nice thing at the end of the day. You're just starting working on modeling, texturing, rendering stuff, to have something that looks pretty decent to work with and to look at, as kind of what you've accomplished thus far. So and then obviously we'll look more and more at the other stuff. So I'm just gonna stop talking here for a minute. Let me check and see any questions that we have here, and then mostly I want to give some time here just for questions. So as I'm looking at these, please go ahead and send in your questions, and I'll be answering the ones that are up right now. So it says, looking at the rendering now, can Modo work from View or Eon for landscape? Now you can export stuff from View. Now, how well everything is going to work back and forth, I am not really sure. It's been a few versions since I've worked directly with Vue. I don't do a ton of landscape work myself, and what I do, I found I can do all inside of Modo. So I kind of work with applications and work back and forth with other applications, just from my own experience, until I need something more, and then I'll step over to another application to bring it in. And I find that's good on a workflow standpoint. It's good on a budgetary standpoint, so you don't have to go and buy more software if you can work around with what you do have. But it's not going to handle some of the things like the ecosystems and stuff that that Vue does out of the box, and that's what it's very good at. But that being said, you can actually set up some parameters and things so that you get something similar right inside of Modo. And I'm doing some kind of future lessons that will discuss, how to do some terrain work and some landscape work, kind of in a similar way to what Vue does. But I'm not sure exactly how good the back and forth is directly. That's something actually I'll look into, though, and see, because it has been, like I said, a couple of versions, a few versions back since I've worked with Vue. And then let's see, maybe we can ask questions. Yeah. So yeah, let's. If anybody else has questions, go ahead and put them in. Like I said, there's about a 10-second delay, but as soon as they do pop up here, I will answer them, and then we'll move on from there. Yeah, so we've gotten pretty much through everything here in Modo. So let me just take a minute here. Go ahead and type away if you have questions, and I'll answer. It looks like somebody's typing. And then I guess a question here, kind of as we're going. So this format that we're doing now, so I'm streaming to YouTube, and then at the same time we're using a Google Chat to be able to do questions. Let me know, and you don't have to let me know right here in the things now, but be thinking about how this works. I mean, there is a little bit of a delay, but the cool thing is this is a completely free solution, so it doesn't add any cost to anybody anywhere. That being said, if we're doing a smaller group and we know there's going to be 15 or less people, then we could work with a Google Hangout. Beyond that, if we get into larger groups, I'm going to be looking at a GoToMeeting account where it's a monthly cost, but that's probably okay. That one we can actually do up to, I think you can go up to like 150 users. So, okay, so we got another question here. Does it render CPU or GPU? It's at this time it's a completely CPU render inside of Modo. I imagine here at some point there's going to be some GPU acceleration. Now, whether or not they go to an entirely GPU render, I really doubt, just because a lot of the framework has been set up to use CPU. Now, that being said, there are some kind of some technologies that might allow leveraging both, and there are some things in Modo that do use CPU and GPU together. It's OpenCL integration, which basically is allowing GPUs to do CPU processes. So I'm really hoping that like Preview Render could get a mix of CPU and GPU renders in one of the upcoming versions. Now, whether or not that will be true, I don't know. But obviously the power of something like a GPU render, really core for core, it's not going to be much different than a CPU render. But the beauty of a GPU render is, if your computer is not rendering fast enough, you can go spend a few $100s on another GPU, pop it in, and then you don't have to do any other changes to your system. You don't have to go buy a new motherboard that has another socket for a new processor or for two processors. You can just put in an extra CPU and use it. So, all right, let's see what else here. We've got, let's see. Who wants to know, does the render use CPU? Okay, we just answered that. What if you have to switch to GPU on the PC as a GPU app? I'm not really sure. I don't think there's any way that you can really implement GPU rendering in here, unless there are some kind of back code ways that you can find a way of leveraging something like OpenCL to just essentially send CPU code and CPU tasks into the GPU. That I'm not sure. So I really don't have a good answer on that. Just so you know, for kind of reference, what I'm rendering with here, and you can see it was pretty quick. I'm rendering on I've got a 6-core i7, so it's basically the bottom of the line of the X99 platform. So it's the, if you just take the regular kind of mainstream CPUs, that are I don't know, what's the new Z170 or whatever it is, or the Z79. So if you're just taking the regular i7 processors, this is just the one step above them. So this isn't going to be too much faster than just whatever you would have. This is probably a $50 more than a quad-core i7 processor. And it's got 6 cores, and it renders pretty quickly. If you were to go up to an 8-core, if you were to go up to obviously higher end stuff like a Xeon workstation or something like that, you'd probably get pretty fantastic preview acceleration, which is something eventually I would like to try, but obviously that's a lot higher budgetary concern. So yeah, let's see, what else? Any other questions? Okay, so I see another question being typed, so I'll give it a second here. But hopefully that answers the question, CPU, GPU. Essentially right now it's all CPU. I would imagine, because GPUs are accelerating in speed more than CPUs at this point. For some reason the technology is developing faster. I wouldn't be surprised if there is some GPU acceleration coming here soon. So let's see. 16 gig RAM faced with lots of problems with 901 compared to 701. I have heard some people have had some issues with 901 versus 801 or 701, and I personally have had almost none. There are some things that you might do to kind of help that. And here, I'll just show here while I'm at it. And just for reference, up until kind of this last year, I had always worked on a Mac, but then I needed a bit more power than I could afford on the Mac side, so I built my own PC. So now I'm on Windows as my daily driver computer. So there are some things Windows-wise that I'm not quite a savvy a Windows user. But what you can do is if you go to the System tab here, and you go to open the Preferences folder, you can see that there are these modo.cfg files. So you could take these, and you could just kind of as a first line thing, don't throw them away entirely. You could just put them like on your desktop and then reboot Modo, and that will reset those. The other thing you can do is if you go to the configs folder, no, that's not where it is. Trying to remember where this is in Windows. See preferences. Yeah, I'm thinking that's mostly going to be it. So if you replace the CFG file, which is the config file, basically just by moving it out of the folder and then rebooting Modo, it will create a new one. A lot of times that can fix a lot of issues. And the other thing you might do is also move out, if you've got a 901 config and an 801 config or a 701 config, move the 701 out as well. The next time you boot 701, it will make a new one of those also, but that's going to force Modo to kind of reboot itself. And then the other thing that you can do is, and you might try this first, is go up to File and then do Reset, and that's going to basically go through. It's going to make everything but the config is going to go and take, and it's going to reset everything to stock settings, which sometimes if you're installing on top of an older version, you'll get some previous preferences and things that will creep in, and that can cause a lot of crashes. That's what I always do when I install a new version of Modo, and I very rarely get a lot of the common complaints that I hear. Oh, the new version's crashing a lot. I very rarely have had crashes with that kind of thing. So I would say try those couple things. If not, shoot me an email, and we'll see if there's some ways that I can help you iron out the problems. And also include in an email, if you want, you can send me a little bit more detailed what some of the problems are that you're having with Modo, and hopefully I can help you fix some of those. So hopefully that helps. Other questions? And I know, like I said, there's like a 10-second delay, so so if there are other questions, I'll give it a second here. Alrighty, and so if if there are any other questions here, I'll kind of wrap up. If you are interested in some more stuff, just kind of right off the bat, I've got a lot of Modo stuff on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/esconnell. Yeah, and there's an email you can use for me, or put up the mac.com one also, because I think that's going to be the one that I get a little bit more quickly. Comes to my phone easier, so it's easier for me to answer more quickly. But if you go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/esconnell, go ahead and subscribe there. I got content there, and I'm putting up new content. I'm doing more and more Modo videos here in the near future, so subscribe there. It's a good place to get. I'm doing a real broad mix of skill levels, so there's going to be some stuff is going to be pretty beginner, some stuff is going to be intermediate to advanced, but you can go and check that out there. Yeah, so that just about does it here for today. I think we'll wrap it up unless there's any other questions, and I'll just give a few more seconds. If you have a question, just throw up a I'm typing or something like that, and I'll wait. Let's see. I've been looking at working with Max and Meyer for quite a while. What's the big thing that makes you want to switch to Modo? So for Modo, I see kind of two big areas that I personally would switch, and then there's some other areas that also I think are very good. One is going to be modeling. I think the modeling tools inside of Modo, and I haven't really even touched them here, are really best in class. I've used a lot of modelers over the time. I've been doing 3D for 20 years plus, and it's a fantastic modeler. I think its rendering engine is also very strong. I think it's better than anything that comes right like out of the box with Max or Maya. I think it's better than Mental Ray essentially. It has a lot of great features. It also can plug into V-Ray, so that would be the one that I kind of see on par in a lot of ways with Modo, in a lot of similarities. They both have strengths and weaknesses, but I think that the rendering engine is really super strong. And then also there is, just in case some of you guys aren't aware, we're kind of doing this as an intro to a 6-week course that's going to be kind of a Modo crash course that will take you through pretty much everything you would need to know in Modo to really kind of get up and running and doing a fair amount of work. And if you actually have some experience coming in, if you've used Modo and you want to come into this, I also have lots of other content. I can kind of adapt it, so if you have some experience, I can make, I've got some higher level stuff that we could go through and cover with you if you if you already are into Modo, but you want kind of a next level of training. That can also be part of it. So that's coming up here, and we're actually going to have an intro session to that. We're going to do a live session on this Friday. And then the class itself would actually start next week. And then we'll do a live session every Friday, and there will be recorded video recordings kind of for lessons throughout the week. And we'll have a little private section of forums that I've got set up where you can post your work and get feedback. You can also obviously email me, and then, like I said, we'll do a live session at the end of each week to to discuss stuff that we work on during the week. Let's see. One more thing about Blender versus cycles from Blender. I have not used cycles very much, but from what I have seen, I really prefer the Modo rendering engine to it. But in a lot of ways, it's going to be fairly similar in overall kind of general kind of usage, So do you remember the upcoming class? Oh, sorry. I hope that answers the Blender question. The upcoming class is with Animation West Africa. So I think there's a link up there in the discussion or the chat thread if you're interested in more info or to register. So other than that, I'm gonna wrap this up right now. And if you have questions, obviously you can still post them in the chat. You can email me directly if you have any specific questions. And I don't know. I think that just about does it. So thanks everybody for coming. I hope you found this useful. If you either haven't used Modo, or if you're looking at getting into Modo, or looking at getting into 3D in general, and this will be up as a recording on my YouTube channel, so obviously you can feel free to review it later on. And so thank you all for coming, and I will see you around. Bye for now.